Hey guys, tonight's guest, Scott Creighton, has some interesting theories about the Pyramid of Giza. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? How's your Thursday going today? Yeah, mine too. It's been quiet. It's been quiet Thursday. My name is Charlotte, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team located in sunny Sacramento, California. But I'm also the host of this show. I'm a journalist. I'm a reporter. You name it. We're 45 strong. The California Haunts team is 45 strong up and down the state of California, which means if you have any paranormal issues that you'd like attended to, we can get to you because there's somebody in practically every county in the state. And we also have branches out of Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Hawaii. So if you have issues there, let me know. And the way to let me know is to contact me via californiahaunts.org or the radio website at californiahaunts.radio.com or my Facebook page, which is my personal name. Or we have some California Haunts pages over on Facebook that you can just Google us over there. And you can contact me from there. Anyway, on that note, if you're watching from Facebook, please hit that follow button if you like what you see. And the same thing goes for YouTube. If you're watching from YouTube, there's that little man, I think it's the bottom right-hand corner, with the magnifying glass and the Sherlock Holmes hat on, and that's our mascot. Click on that. That'll subscribe you to all of our videos. And we have around 400 videos sitting over there that are of different topics. We don't always do paranormal. Look at what we're doing tonight, right? We're going to be talking about the Pyramid of Giza. So, we'd like to kind of change it up. I'm a journalist. I like to do that. So if you like what you hear and stuff, go ahead and please subscribe. And that'll even notify you when we have a new video coming out. All right. My guest tonight, Scott Creighton, has written a few books on the mysteries of the Pyramid of Giza. He's got some interesting theories. So we're going to bring him on and talk about those theories and see what you guys think, right? All right. So here we go. Hello, sir.
Hello there, Charlotte. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Just about a week.
It's been a busy week for you guys, huh?
Oh yeah, you could say that, yeah. But I think it's getting a bit out of hand. It's getting a bit over the top, I think, in a lot of ways with the Queen's passing. The media has just gone crazy over here, so it's just glad to be kind of having the TV off and sitting down and doing something completely different right now.
Did you go out to see the cortege? Did you go out to see the car go by, or no?
No. It was through in Edinburgh, which is in the east coast of Scotland. I'm in Glasgow, on the west coast of Scotland. So, I mean, I'm not. I mean, a lot of respect for the former Queen, but I'm not per se a royalist. So fairly sort of Republican views, I would say, but but yeah, a lot of admiration, a lot of respect for the former Queen.
Right. Well, over here, it's we don't have full coverage on it, but people do get Sky News and they get the BBC, so there's a lot of people staying up at night watching all that stuff. So
yeah.
Goes to show you.
I mean, she was a lovely person. I mean, did a lot of good work in her lifetime, but the end of an era.
Right. Well, Americans are funny. Here we left to get away from that, and then the majority of Americans want to watch it 24/7 on TV. Because they're impressed to have a story over here, even.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Mixed up world.
Yes. Tell me about you.
Essentially, my career is in engineering, IT engineering. I've done for about 30 years or so. And I have to say, I'm kind of, it's just, you get to that point in life where you just don't like doing IT anymore, So, I started writing some books a few years, I started researching probably about 20 years ago. So I think my first book was published about 12, maybe 14 years ago, can't quite remember. But that's really what I wanted to do. I mean, my very early career, I actually started as a journalist, believe it or not, like yourself. So, but that was way back in the early 80s, and back here in the UK, it was not a good time to be going into journalism, because the newspaper industry was going through major changes back in the early 80s with technology and so forth, and they were shedding staff left, right, and centre. So it wasn't a good time to be going into journalism. So, but I pursued it independently through my writing books. I've always had a fascination for ancient Egypt ever since I was a small boy. And well, I suppose, like most people, really, you're taught in junior school about this amazing civilization. But it's only when you get older, you really start to look at it and go, well, I was told this when I was young, but that doesn't really kind of add up. It doesn't really kind of make any sense. And then you start wondering about life. You start wondering about our origins. Where did we come from? What is the roots of our current civilization? Where did it all start? And inevitably that leads you to Egypt and to the study of ancient Egypt, because that really is the most tangible thing that we have left, that takes us back to where it all began. For us as a modern civilization, that's our roots, that's our ancient heritage, if you like. So to find out our true roots, you have to start there. So that's what I did. And as my research progressed over the years, my thinking completely changed on what the purpose for these amazing structures in Egypt, purpose completely changed, and my views completely changed from what I was led to believe when I was, in junior high school, being taught about ancient Egypt then, so my views now are radically different.
So, in doing your research, because obviously, I learned in school as well, about this stuff. It still fascinates me. I'm on Discovery Channel all the time, or over on Nat Geo watching this stuff. So, when you started to look into this, what struck you as the first major thing that didn't add up?
Well, that's a good question. I think for me, we're taught in high school or junior school that these monuments were the tombs of individual pharaohs or ancient Egyptian kings. That's what we're taught, that they built these incredible monuments to store or house the body of an ancient Egyptian king. Now, think about this. These monuments, like the Great Pyramid, is 481 feet high, nearly 500 feet tall. It can be seen from about 30 miles away. So if you're a king, and, this is one of the things that I learned, is that the ancient Egyptian king's body had to be preserved. It had to be protected, because the king was actually more important in ancient Egypt in death than he was in life. Or rather, his soul was more important, because it was the king's soul that could, ascend to the heavens and intercede with the gods there in the heavens, the stars in the heavens. And if the king's body was violated in any way, or destroyed or disturbed or desecrated in any way, shape or form, then that could no longer happen. And that king would die what the ancient Egyptians called an eternal death. And he could no longer intercede with the gods, which could bring chaos to the kingdom. Okay. So this king's body had to be preserved. Now, for me, the best way of doing that is to bury the body somewhere deep underground
Mm-hmm.
with no marker as to where that body has actually been placed. In fact, Khufu, the builder, or we're told the builder of the Great Pyramid at Giza, his own mother, he buried his own mother in an underground tomb, a few hundred yards from, or meters from, the Great Pyramid, on the east side of the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
He knew himself that the most successful and secure burial was a burial deep underground with no marker. It was her tomb, Queen Hetepheres, her tomb was only found by accident, I think by George Reisner's crew in Egypt in the 1920s. It was found purely accidentally. The shaft that went down to this underground chamber was discovered accidentally. So that's, he knew, Khufu himself knew that the most secure burial was a burial where you couldn't actually see there was anything buried.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm asking myself, why on earth then would they build a cairn, a monument 500 feet tall that can be seen from 20, 30 miles away?
Mm-hmm.
There's a treasure, guys. Look, 30, why would you do that?
Right.
Right. So that to me was the first kind of inkling that things weren't quite what they seem with these monuments. So that essentially is kind of where it kind of kick-started my mind. No, I've got to find out a bit more about this. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up.
So as you started to research in, what did you find out as far as that goes? Because I agree with you. I mean, it's like a big beacon. If you have something that's 400 feet tall like that, hey, there's somebody here that's here for a reason. Let's start start poking around. So what?
Yeah.
So when you research, what did you find out?
Well, a beacon, that's exactly the term that I use in my books, Charlotte. That is exactly what it was. Or we say in Scotland, a cairn, or a beacon. And I thought to myself, well, if it is a beacon of some kind, why would they need a beacon of some kind? And so that kind of is the sort of channel that I went down to try and investigate this. And one of the things I found was that the ancient Egyptians themselves, see, this theory that I write about, this is the book here,
There we go.
The Great Pyramid Void Enigma. That's not actually my theory per se. What I write about is actually what mainstream Egyptology, or in this particular book, what mainstream Egyptology ignores.
Okay.
Because you see, the ancient Egyptians themselves, and some of their texts that have come down to us, and we can still read them today, tell us the purpose of the pyramids, why they built them. But this is completely dismissed by mainstream Egyptology as nothing more than myth and legend.
Okay.
That's what they believe, these ancient texts that the ancient Egyptians themselves passed down to us that describe the purpose of these pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the texts that have come down to us is from the Coptic Egyptians. Now, the Coptic Egyptians still exist in Egypt today. They're a minority group, about 5 or 10% of the Egyptian population. And they maintain that they are the custodians, if you like, the descendants of the original ancient Egyptians, going all the way back to the pyramid builders and even further back into antiquity. They maintain that they are the guardians, the custodians of all of that ancient history. And one of the legends that they passed down, or their cultural heritage that they have passed down to us, is a legend known as the Legend of Saurid. And this legend basically says that Saurid, this king, ancient Egyptian king known as Saurid, saw something in the heavens and the skies that was very unusual. And he asked his astronomer priests to look into it and, what is going on here. The stars were moving out of their normal course across the heavens. The stars were changing their path across the heavens, and this was really confusing and disturbing, because these were the gods, the stars were the gods. What are they doing? So the astronomer priests studied this, and they noticed, yes, the stars were changing. And they came back and they told King Saurid, this means that in 300 years' time, there will be a great flood, and it will drown the entire country. No one will escape from this deluge. That's what these astronomer priests told King Saurid. Now, what his response was, okay, what we are going to do in defense of this, or to mitigate the effects of this devastating flood, is to build monumental man-made mountains. And in these, we are going to place everything that the kingdom will need to reconstitute, or to be reborn again, or reborn after this deluge, like you can see in the picture just there. So that is essentially what the Saurid legend tells us. Now, Egyptologists dismiss this legend. They dismiss it for a number of reasons which I personally believe are wrong. They shouldn't be dismissing it, because one of the reasons is there was no King Saurid. That's one of the first reasons that they say why they dismiss this legend. There was no King Saurid in any of the ancient Egyptian king lists, and there's about 4 or 5 different ancient Egyptian king lists, and he isn't mentioned in any of them. So it's just a fantasy. However, a Hungarian scholar, a chap named Sandor Fodor, or Alexander Fodor, he looked into this Saurid legend. He's an academic, and he looked into the Saurid legend in depth. And what he discovered was that the name Saurid actually means Khufu.
Wow.
Now, I'll spare you the detail of how he came to that conclusion.
Right.
It's to do with translation from one language to another language. But essentially, in the end, he came to the conclusion, no, Saurid is actually Khufu. That's what it means. So there's the first thing being blown out of the water. Yeah, we are talking about a legend about a real ancient Egyptian king, not a mythical king at all. The second reason why they dismiss this legend is because of some of the content within the legend seems like truly bizarre. Like it says that the stars in the heavens moved out of their normal place. Well, that's impossible. But actually it's not, because it's not the stars that are moving out of the normal place. It's the earth beneath them that's turning over. But again, mainstream Egyptologist says, well, that can't happen. There's no such thing as a rapid, inversion of the earth. That simply can't happen. But, well, that was the thought probably maybe about 50 or 60 years ago, that the earth cannot invert rapidly because of its equatorial bulge. It's perfectly stable in its rotation. But scientists recently have made other calculations, and we now know that the earth can turn over without a devastating impact from another massive planet. That was the view in the past, that the earth needed to collide with another massive planet in order for it to turn over.
Right.
We know this is now not the case, because if that had happened, it would basically vaporize every organism on the planet. And since that hasn't happened, we're still here. That hasn't happened. But scientists nowadays have realized that, well, actually, no, if you do this, if this happens or that happens, they've done various models and calculations, and we now know that it is possible for an inversion to happen. I don't know, Charlotte, if you've seen the Gianni Beckhoff effect. Have you heard of that, the Gianni Beckhoff effect?
I haven't heard about that. What is that?
Right, okay. You'll see it on YouTube. Now, Gianni Beckhoff, he was a Russian cosmonaut in Salyut 7 space station in the early 1980s. And while on board this space station, he was unscrewing a wing nut from its panel, and he just went like that to flip the handle. It started rotating, spun loose from its wall mounting, and just carried on through the space station like that, a straight line through the space station. In zero gravity, obviously. But as it was moving, it would flip 180 degrees and then carry on, and then flip again and carry on, automatically, with no external interference at all. It would just flip itself 180 degrees, and kept doing this at regular intervals right through the space station in a straight line. And the Russian government kept this observation secret for about 10 or 15 years until they understood what the heck was going on here. And we now understand it as the intermediate axis theorem. We've actually known about the mathematics for a lot longer than the actual observable physics of it. We understood the mathematics of it before we could actually observe it, because it actually happens on Earth as well, but you can only observe it in space because things slowed down. So anyway, this scientists say, well, that can't happen to the Earth. Well, I'm not so sure, because I've seen models, again, you can watch them on YouTube, that show, because they say that the Earth, because the Earth is a perfect sphere and it's in its most stable axis. Well, if the Earth is a dynamic thing, it's not constant. It's constantly changing. It's dynamic. Sometimes, like 10,000 years ago, the Earth's oceans were 400 or so feet, lower than they are today. 100,000 years ago, the oceans were about 26 feet higher than they are today.
Right.
So the Earth is a dynamic thing. So if the oceans go much lower, like 400 feet lower, it's going to change the mass distribution of the planet, and there may come a tipping point through that change. I suspect there's a tipping point through that change. So anyway, that is one of the other reasons why Egyptologists dismiss the Saurid legend, that he saw this happening, and they say, no, that's impossible. Well, actually, it's not. So there we have two things already. The Saurid is a real person, it's Khufu, and we now know that actually, Earth inversions, mathematically, we know they can happen. And there's actually evidence from ancient Egypt itself that it has happened. But that's perhaps a side issue. I go through all that in the book. There's a whole bunch of evidence that shows that this event really did happen, and that this is why the ancient Egyptians were building these monuments essentially as arks. I call them recovery vaults, but essentially they were arks. Right. And it's quite strange, because the early Christian church, around about 100, 200 AD, one of the early fathers of the church was Origen. And in his homilies, he actually tells us that the ark was a pyramid. You know, he talks about the pyramids as arks. The early fathers of the Christian church were talking about, the pyramid as an ark. There's some Renaissance artists, Lorenzo Ghiberti. He has done these amazing Renaissance paintings in Florence, and on the doors of the baptistry of Florence, and you see this depiction of Noah and the flood. And if you look at the ark and the animals coming out of the ark, it's a pyramid. It's a huge pyramid. You know, so there's this ancient tradition that pyramids were actually arks. I think it's maybe got a wee bit lost in translation. Right. I don't think they stored animals in the pyramids. They probably stored seeds and tools and, things like that they would need to, reboot their knowledge. They would, papyri, books, whatever, inside these structures. They also built massive boats as well around the base of the pyramid. I mean, around the base of the Great Pyramid, there's something like 7, maybe 9, maybe even more than that, pits where there were these massive boats, just ready for this deluge. They would obviously be for the people, maybe some animals, I don't know. But they were basically preparing for this deluge. That's the reason the ancient Egyptians tell us they built these monuments. So, as my research continued, and I'm looking more and more into this legend of Saurid, I took a sort of slight diversion because I was caught up with these painted markings that they found inside some chambers, hidden chambers inside the Great Pyramid by a chap called Richard William Howard Weiss. He was a British antiquarian pyramid explorer. He went to Giza in about 1836, 1837. And in 1837, he blasted his way into these 4 hidden chambers deep inside the Great Pyramid. They're slightly above the King's Chamber. These are about 36 feet long, about 16 feet wide. Each of them are only about 3 feet high, so you can't even stand up in them. You have to crawl your way through these. Supposedly found all these painted markings on the walls, these 4 chambers. And among these painted markings, they're just rough markings with red ochre paint. They weren't like proper chiseled, exquisite hieroglyphics or anything like that. They were just rough graffiti, basically. And among these markings, he claimed to have found the name of the Pharaoh Khufu. Now, what troubled me from fairly early on about the markings was their style. Because if you look at most of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic and what's called hieratic writing, hieratic is basically written hieroglyphics, if you like, whereas hieroglyphics, we tend to think that they are mainly chiseled.
Right,
yeah?
Right.
So hieroglyphics are mainly sort of chiseled, whereas hieratic writing is on papyri, and it evolved and changed over time, whereas hieroglyphics didn't change at all over time. So I'm looking at this ancient Egyptian writing, and I'm thinking, there's something strange about this, because up until the 4th dynasty and beyond the 4th dynasty, virtually all of the cartouches or kings' names were written vertically. Yeah. But all the ones that Howard Weiss wrote were written horizontally. and horizontal hieroglyphic writing. It started probably maybe about 2000 or 2100 BC, which is about 400 years after Khufu. So how we got these horizontal cartouches inside these chambers? So that was just the first thing that I noticed. And then I noticed that there's some numbers painted onto the chamber walls. Number 11, the number 12, 20, 21. These numbers are written on the chamber walls. And I noticed they've been written back to front. The numbers have been wrongly painted onto the wall. They're back to front. So I started noticing all these things about these markings in this chamber, that attribute, and this, you have to understand, this cartouche of this King Khufu, this is the main piece of evidence that Egyptologists use to date the pyramid to the 4th dynasty. That's about 2,500 BC. The style of writing, whereas in fact it's actually more 2000 BC if you go by that standard. But also to King Khufu, that is the main piece of evidence that they have that he built the Great Pyramid. Now, these chambers were completely sealed. Howard Weiss had to use gunpowder to blast his way through the granite deep inside the Great Pyramid to get into these hidden chambers. So it's not like someone, in antiquity could have done it. No one in antiquity after the pyramid had been built could have done this. So that was a slight diversion. I had to analyze that because one of the things that this discovery of Howard Weiss did is, to my mind, it sent Egyptology down the wrong path. It basically threw them, I think, what you call in America a curveball.
Yes.
Yeah, it threw mainstream Egyptology a curveball because, as far as I'm concerned, these markings that Howard Weiss claimed to have discovered are faked. Not all of them, vast majority of them, and certainly all of the king's names that were found have been faked. I explain that in my other book, The Great Pyramid Hoax. And actually, in the appendices of this book, there's more evidence that's come to light since The Great Pyramid Hoax was published. So that new evidence is in that book. So that discovery of Howard Weiss, or claimed discovery, threw Egyptology a curveball because that solidified in their minds why these structures were built as the tomb for a single pharaoh. That's what they now firmly believed because of his discovery, which kind of troubled me because one of the things that the Saurid legend tells us, excuse me, just take some.
Sure.
One of the other things that the Saurid legend tells us that Khufu or Saurid placed inside these structures, particularly the Great Pyramid, in fact, only the Great Pyramid, were the bodies of his ancestors. So Egyptology are telling us, because of this discovery of Howard Weiss, that the pyramid was built as a tomb for just one pharaoh.
Right.
Whereas the ancient Egyptians are saying, no, Khufu put all his ancestors in the Great Pyramid. So there's a contradiction there. So I looked into this further and I found some quite amazing things. The Khufu had how many ancestors? He had 27 ancestor kings that could, all the way back to the first king Menes. There's 27 ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things inside the Great Pyramid that Egyptologists, mainstream Egyptologists, struggle really to explain. They've got ideas, yeah, but their ideas really don't make a lot of sense. They really don't. Is the Grand Gallery. Now, the Grand Gallery is about 150 feet long. It slopes at a 26 degree angle. On either side of the now it's about 30 feet high. It's about 12 feet wide and 150 feet long. And it goes like that, it's sort of corbelled walls that incline inwards like that. And on each side of these walls, along the side there's a sidewalk, or what we call in the UK a pavement. There's a sidewalk on either side. And into each of these sidewalks, there are these notches. Each notch is about, some are 2.5 feet wide, others are 2 feet wide, and they alternate 2.5, 2, 2.5, 2. And they're about 8 inches deep. Egyptologists don't really know what these are for. But one of the other legends that have come from the ancient Egyptians tells us that when Al-Mamun, he first breached the Great Pyramid in 820 AD, when he first went in there, it said that he found statues. And they believed they were the statues of Saurid's ancestors. And the thing is, if you count the number of notches, there's 27 on either side. Khufu had 27 ancestors, 27 statues of each of the ancestors. King and queen facing each other all the way up this Grand Gallery. So but why would they need all of these statues? Because remember, the book is called The Big Void.
Right.
Now, the Big Void, and Big Void Enigma, the Big Void was discovered in 2017 by a group of about 30 scientists split into 3 teams using different, what's called myography. It's like a form of X-ray, except where X-rays can look into human flesh. Myography can look into the hardest of rocks, can see deep into the hardest of rocks. And they discovered this massive space that they did not know was there. And it's situated about 10 or 15 feet above the Grand Gallery. Now, when I first heard this, it was like a flashbulb went off my head. That's it. That's the missing piece. Because I was like, well, why? But the statues, and the bodies would need to be there. Now, let me explain that. To the ancient Egyptians, when the king died, I touched on this earlier, when the king dies, they preserved the body from decay. That was the whole purpose of embalming. They had to preserve the body, the king's body, from decay. Because if the king's body decayed so much and, was basically unrecognizable, his soul would not be able to recognize the king's body. And if the soul could not enter the king's body because it couldn't find the body, it decayed too badly, the king would die an eternal death. But the ancient Egyptians were clever. What they did was they created a substitute likeness for the king, the statue.
Okay.
That's why in the Grand Gallery, that's where they placed the statue. And you see this in Egyptian tombs, even into the late period. They found kings, they've actually found a lot of ancient Egyptian kings. The strange thing is they haven't found any from Khufu, before Khufu. They haven't found any kings from that period. They found kings from later periods, just not the Old Kingdom. Because, and this is what this Legend of Saurid tells us, Khufu took all his ancestors and placed them inside the Great Pyramid. And that's why each of them has a statue. It's called a Ka statue, because if the king's body in that pyramid, up in that big void, decayed so badly, its soul would have a surrogate, a statue down below. And the statue was always placed below, or it was always placed lower than the actual body. In these later tombs, we find there's a statue in these tombs for the king as well, a Ka statue. And it's always placed lower than the body, just like we see in the Great Pyramid. The Grand Gallery is below, that's the Grand Gallery, and the big void is above it. So that's essentially why the big void, I'm saying that when they finally managed to find a means, a way of exploring it, probably with endoscopic camera, a drilling a hole and putting an endoscopic camera, that's what they'll find. They'll find 27 kings and 27 queens, ancient kings and queens. Now, one of the, other things that point to that is the fact that they're in the Old Kingdom pre-Khufu, not after Khufu. This was only discovered, I'm about to tell, was only discovered pre-Khufu, or Khufu's time and before. There's a number of tombs or kings' sarcophagi that we have discovered in modern times, preserved completely entire, the tombs being undisturbed. And we are the first people to go into the tomb since the person was first interred.
Right.
When they opened the sarcophagus, they prized the lid off the sealed sarcophagus that had never been opened. It was empty. And they found about 3, 4, 5 maybe of these sarcophagi that undisturbed, and when they opened, it was empty. I mean, even Khufu's mother, who was, buried at Giza, when they opened, George Reisner in the 1920s opened her sarcophagi, it was empty. And they know it was used because there were stains in the bottom of the sarcophagi, but for some reason, they took her body out and put it somewhere else. So this is what I'm saying, is that, they did. That's exactly what they did. They took it, just as they said they were doing in the Saurid legend, they took it and placed it inside the big void. That's its purpose, because if these mastaba, the kings up until then were built in these low mud brick mastabas, they were expecting a deluge. That would scrub the land completely clean.
Right.
It would destroy all these kings and queens. How is the rebirth going to happen? Because they were the key to it happening. They were the ones, the gods, the god kings in death, who could intercede with the gods in heaven to bring about rebirth. It couldn't happen if their bodies were destroyed. And so they had to make sure that they were well above where they anticipated the floodwaters would be, safe haven. And this is the other thing about the big void. There's no passages to it. They didn't discover any passages. They can see the passages to the king's chamber, the grand gallery, the queen's chamber, the subterranean chamber. They can see all these passages, but not for the big void. It doesn't have any. And that would be exactly right, because when the pyramid is built layer by layer by layer all the way up, when the roof of the big void is open, that's when the Lord the bodies in to safeguard them for all eternity from this devastating flood. And because there's no passages, it's impossible to find. It really is impossible to find. And in fact, the chambers, like the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, they're possibly decoys. Possibly decoys. Now, you asked earlier, Charlotte, at the top of the show, one of the main pieces of evidence that got me thinking about there's something not right here. Another one is when Giovanni Belzoni, he was an Italian Egyptologist in the 1800s. He was the first person to enter the middle pyramid at Giza. It looks like the tallest pyramid. It looks like the Great Pyramid, but the middle pyramid isn't the Great Pyramid, even though it looks taller. It's what's called G2, or the Pyramid of Khafra. Khufu's to the right of that. Anyway, Khufu is actually taller, but it's on lower ground. Anyway, when Giovanni Belzoni entered G2, Khafra's pyramid, he found what they call the King's Chamber, and the sarcophagus was still there, still sealed.
Wow.
He gets the lid off. What do you think he found?
Nothing. Right?
No, he found something.
He did?
What he found was plain old Egyptian earth.
Okay.
In this box, a box full of earth, because that's exactly what they were doing. It wasn't about the rebirth of a king,
right?
It was about the rebirth of the earth.
Interesting.
It was a chthonic ritual about the rebirth of the earth. And after that, in later dynasties, what you find is the ancient Egyptians made these small miniature sarcophagi, made of wood or even stone or clay, And what they would do with these, they were only about 18 inches long, and they would fill these with earth. And into the earth they would impress the figure of the god Osiris, who was the god of rebirth and regeneration. And they would place a lid on it and put it in a hole in the ground, bury it, and place a rock on top, symbolizing the pyramid. Now, what that tells me is that they knew. Remember, these are later dynasties, later Egyptian people from the time of the pyramid builders. They knew what was in the boxes in those pyramids. It was earth, because they were doing it themselves. They knew the tradition. They understood what it was all about. So that for me was another reason that told me, no, these were not about the burial of kings in the traditional sense. There was one, yes, the Great Pyramid was about the burial of kings, but not just for one king. They put the whole lot in that one pyramid. All the other pyramids, no, they were purely about, storing, acting as cairns, for the storage within the pyramid, below the pyramid, around the pyramid, of everything that the country would need to be reborn, and acting as a cairn, so that people could see it from 30, 40 miles away or wherever. That's exactly what you would need in a natural disaster. You want to find, where's the recovery items? Where are they? You can see them from miles away. And that was the point. It's not a good idea for the burial of a king. It's certainly a good idea for finding important items, tools, seeds, knowledge, to reboot the kingdom. So that essentially is in a nutshell. And as I said, it's not really my hypothesis. It's what the Egyptians themselves tell us, which I suppose I'm essentially trying to rehabilitate, this legend, to get it out there back into mainstream thought again. Because I genuinely believe, for a lot of reasons, which I explain in the book, that there's more substance and truth to that legend than Egyptologists will admit, because they've got their ideas and they're not letting go of them.
Well, it makes sense, because I know I've seen stuff on Nat Geo and Discovery about these different mountains where they have found seashells up high on the mountains, and they found the skeletons of fish up there.
Yeah.
So there had, somewhere along the line, like you say, there had to be some kind of great flood of water.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, whether the deluge happened or not is kind of immaterial, because the thing that matters is that they believed it was going to happen.
Right.
That was the impetus, the motivation for the construction of these monuments. Right. They believed it was going to happen. Whether it did or not, there's some indications that the site at Giza was inundated by a great deluge of water. Mm-hmm. There's stories that tell us that, excuse me, the stories that tell us that the monuments had tide marks, like halfway up, and the watermark halfway up. When the casing stones were still on the pyramid, they could see these tide marks on the gleaming white casing stones where there had been an inundation. There's a chap called Sharif Al-Morsi. He lives in Egypt near Giza, and he's done incredible research about an inundation happening on the Giza plateau, and he's found a ton of evidence to show that actually it was seriously inundated by a deluge at some time in antiquity. One of the things he's shown is the exoskeleton or shell of a sea urchin, and it was embedded on top of a wall, this ancient Egyptian wall. The mortuary temple of the third pyramid at Giza, the smallest of the three, at the temple beside that, on this wall, the wall's probably about 7, maybe 10 feet high, and there's this sea urchin, exoskeleton of this sea urchin, this ancient, embedded.
Yeah.
Now, people say, oh, well, I mean, it's limestone. Limestone's made with shells. No, limestone's made with tiny, tiny, tiny fragments of shell, not, a massive exoskeleton of a complete sea urchin. So he found that and, embedded into the top layer of this wall. And, it could only have been there when that area had been like a shallow lagoon at some point in its history, as the waters were gradually receding. But in the latest book, The Great Pyramid Void, Enigma, I go into the deluge and the flood in great depth, and the symbology of everywhere at Giza and the pyramids themselves and their legends, and their images, their artwork, they talk. It's about the flood. It's about this coming deluge.
Right.
The very name, Charlotte, the very name of the Great Pyramid, it's called Akhet Khufu. Akhet Khufu. That's its name. That's the name that Egyptology gives to the Great Pyramid and the kind of sort of Giza plateau, probably in ancient times, was Akhet Khufu. Now, the word Akhet means flood. That's what it means. The word Khufu means protector. That's what those two words mean. Protector from the flood protector. It's right there. There's your mic, boom, right. That's it. Yeah. Akhet Khufu, flood protector. When you look at the symbol for the pyramid, the hieroglyphic for the pyramid, it's a triangle, as you would expect, but below it is this narrow rectangle underneath it. Now, Egyptologists tell us that the narrow rectangle below the pyramid is just the perimeter wall around the base of the pyramid. Part of the pyramids have these walls around the base. It's not. It's absolutely not that at all. Because if you look at the hieroglyphics, yeah, the pyramid's a pyramid, but if you look at the hieroglyphic for a rectangle, it's a body of water. That's what it is. It's a pyramid rising out of a body of water. How do I know this to be fact? Because if you look at the South Pyramid at Saqqara, it's pretty much a rubble pile now. But if you look, its basement wall or perimeter wall is still there. And the interesting thing about the pyramid wall of the South Pyramid at Saqqara, it's like a wave. It's wavy. Yeah. Which is a symbol for water, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic symbol for water. So rather than just having its perimeter wall just a straight rectangle, they actually made it a wavy wall, so that there could be no misunderstanding. It's the pyramid rising out of water. That's what, and you see this everywhere, the pyramid rising out of water. So this is what the myth of Isis and Osiris. That is a metaphor. I explain this in the book. I go into it in some depth in the book. It's a metaphor for this deluge, this coming deluge. The myth of Isis and Osiris, it tells us that Seth, who was the brother of Osiris, he was jealous of Osiris, who was the king. Seth wanted to be king. So what he did was he tricked Osiris into lying in the sarcophagus, and which he then, Seth, having done this, quickly closed it, sealed it, and threw it into the Nile where Osiris drowned. Isis managed to find the body and resurrect her husband. Finding this out, Seth then took Osiris again, and this time he cut his body into 16 pieces. Some parts of the legend say 14. Cut his body into 16 pieces and scattered it across the land of Egypt, or these 16 pieces across the land of Egypt. Now here's the thing. If you look at the distribution pattern of the first 16 pyramids, that's big pyramids, small pyramids. If you look at the distribution pattern of those 16 pyramids, you see this in one of my earlier books. They form they basically create a stickman outlook of the iconic Osiris image. You've probably seen it with the three-pronged Atif crown and the crook and flail, on his hands. It creates that image on the ground with these 16 pyramids. So this is what I'm saying. Osiris, the pyramid texts, they tell us Osiris is the pyramid. The construction of the pyramids is Osiris. That's what the pyramid texts explicitly say. So really, Osiris is the pyramids, these first 16 pyramids. That's who Osiris is and was. And his body being thrown into the Nile and drowned, that's a metaphor for these pyramids being covered in water by the deluge. Osiris, the 16 pyramids, the body of Osiris, covered in water, being drowned, and then eventually rising out of the water as the sea levels subside. So this is what it's all about, But I say it's done in allegorical terms, the myth of Isis and Osiris. But when you see, the 16 pyramids, these 16 pieces are actually pyramids. It's not body parts. The body is the pyramids. That's what the pyramid texts tell us. One of the titles of Isis, the wife of Osiris, is Isis was known as the mistress of the pyramids. Now, why would she be known as the mistress of the pyramids? Well, because her husband was the pyramids.
Yeah.
The 16 pyramids were Osiris. So she was the mistress of the pyramids, which were Osiris. She's mistress of Osiris. So, so it all ties together, and, it's, I just encourage people really to look a bit more deeper into these ancient legends, and basically keep an open mind to what they're really telling us. I think there is a lot more truth in those legends than mainstream Egyptology would have us believe.
You know what? I've learned so much tonight. I mean, this is incredible. It just totally blew my mind tonight. That is really cool. That is and it makes perfect sense.
Well, I think it makes sense. The ultimate proof obviously will be when we get into the big void, because I don't know if that will happen in my lifetime. I doubt it. But the ultimate proof of this hypothesis, of this legend, will be when excuse me, my voice is going a wee bit this morning. Yeah, so the ultimate proof will be when they manage to get in there somehow and see what's in there. I'm pretty certain that it's what the ancient Egyptians tell us is in there.
That is really cool. I want to thank you for coming on. This was great.
I'm pleased to be here. I'm glad to do these interviews, and always nice to meet new people that are interested in hearing about our ancient history and our origins. That's what it's really all about.
I am so fascinated by this stuff, and from what you're saying, I want to look into it more now. Now you got me really, really curious to want to start plugging away at it, because what you're saying makes perfect sense. About them, because there's really no function for them except that like you say, the steps on there make sure to be a level up there for when the water came up. That makes perfect sense. Perfect.
Yeah. They had to preserve the bodies. They had to preserve the bodies of the kings, because. And it was just in the one pyramid, as I said. That's why the Grand Gallery, Egyptologists can't explain the Grand Gallery. They just don't know why it's there. I mean, and now they've got another Grand Gallery, if you like, so they're going, oh, what's going on? Because most pyramids only have one chamber. The Great Pyramid now has 5. They're like, what's going on? Because that's the one that they used. That was the engine room, what I call the engine room of the whole rebirth machine for the kingdom. The Great Pyramid was the engine room. That's where all these kings, in their rebirth, to ensure that their bodies were not destroyed in this deluge, they were preserved, because only the Osiris kings could ascend to the heavens and intercede with the gods on behalf of the kingdom to make sure it could be reborn. They had to be preserved.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then having the storage pyramids for the rest of the stuff, so that we can restart fresh. That makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, because if you look at G2, the middle pyramid at Giza, they found these galleries, what they call the galleries. And again, Egyptologists don't know what they're for. There's 100 of them to the west side of the middle pyramid at Giza. And each of them are about 10, 12 feet deep, 100 feet long, and about 10, 12 feet wide. There's 100 of these, and they don't know what they were for. Mark Lehner, the American Egyptologist, suggested that they were for storing things. But exactly for that.
It is, yeah.
But beside the cairn, the big beacon, they're going to get found. It's going to get found.
Absolutely. Again, I want to thank you for coming on. How can people find you, sir?
I host the Alternative Egyptology Forum on ATS, abovetopsecret.com. I host so you can interact with me there. If you've got something you want to say, just pop on there and you'll find me.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. Like I said, I appreciate you coming on. I've been dying to talk to you, literally dying to talk to you because of this. I'm so fascinated by ancient Egypt and the history over there. Just totally blew me away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlotte. Nice to see you. Take
Maybe
care.
some other time we can get you on again to talk more about this stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you have a
Take
good
care.
you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
I'll do my best.
Right. Have a good one, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, I learned a lot, and I remember hearing him the first time I heard him on the radio. He blew my mind, and he blew my mind again today. Who would have thought of this theory? And I think it's a very plausible theory, because there were a lot. Not only did the whole legend with the Noah flood come in, but I mean there was a cataclysmic flood. Like I said, there's some mountains out in the Middle East and stuff where they have gone up there and they have found different things from fish and carcasses from fish, skeletons of fish and stuff like that on them, and there's no reason for them to be there. They're just there. So I mean, the whole thing is plausible. Anyway, tomorrow Nancy will be with us. It's Casual Friday, and she will be with us again. Don't know what we're going to be talking about yet. It's going to be a surprise topic. Don't we love those days? But she's going to be with us again. And so she'll be here. If you're watching from Facebook and you enjoyed the show, please be sure to follow. We're looking for people to follow us. If you're interested in following me on Instagram, that is under Ghostygal, and that's over at Instagram.com. Ghostygal. And if you're watching from YouTube, please click on the little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner with the magnifying glass on and the Sherlock Holmes hat, because that will subscribe you to our future videos. All right, so I'm going to show you Scott's information and his website, and also where to get his books. That I put that together for you. And okay, let me do that real quick. Here we go. Okay, so the website is intertraditions.com. That's intertraditions.com. And the Giza Prophecy is one of the books. The Great Pyramid Hoax. The Great Pyramid Void Enigma. The Secret Chamber of Osiris. And those are available at Amazon.com. All right. Once again, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. I will see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. With Nancy Pacific. 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Bye.